Max's furious bark shattered the uneasy silence as a taser's cold light locked onto him, a lifeline to a haunted veteran, now a target. Jake's desperate shout cut through the tension. "He's a service dog!" But would it be enough to stop a tragedy unfolding? What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns of the Reynolds' quiet street. Jake stood rooted near the edge of his driveway, the weight of his military past pressing down on his broad shoulders despite the apparent calm around him. The neighborhood, with its neat rows of identical houses and trimmed hedges, was a world away from the chaos and unpredictability of the battlefield, yet in this moment it felt just as volatile. His gaze never left Max, the sleek German shepherd at his side, muscles coiled like a finely tuned machine, alert to the slightest shift in the environment. Max was not just a dog, he was a carefully trained sentinel, a protector who sensed the tremors in Jake's soul before they surfaced. An anchor in the storm of post-traumatic stress. Jake's breath was steady, practiced in controlled calm, but his senses were razor-sharp. Max's ears twitched, his low, wary growl threaded through the air, a warning Jake recognized instantly. Something was wrong. From the corner of his eye, Jake saw the approaching figure, Officer Mark Davis, walking cautiously down the sidewalk. The cop's posture was tense, shoulders raised, eyes scanning like a predator, sizing up prey. Jake knew the look. It was the look of someone on edge, someone carrying too much responsibility with too little experience. Mark's uniform was crisp, but his youth betrayed him. He hadn't yet learned to temper instinct with understanding. Max's bark sliced through the afternoon stillness, a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through Jake's calm like a knife. He moved instinctively, raising a hand to halt Mark before the officer stepped onto his property. "Wait! He's a service dog!" Jake's voice cracked with urgency, raw and desperate. The words hung in the air, but Mark's eyes didn't soften. Instead, they flicked with unease, suspicion hardening his expression. The officer's hand moved swiftly, drawing a taser, a weapon meant to neutralize threats. The sudden motion was like a flash of lightning against the serene backdrop, jolting Jake's heart into a frantic rhythm. Fear and misunderstanding coalesced in that brief moment. Mark saw only a dog, large, imposing, and barking, ignoring the carefully woven bond between man and animal that had been forged through years of pain and recovery. His finger tightened on the taser's trigger, ready to unleash a jolt of electricity on what he perceived as a threat. Jake stepped forward, desperation fueling his voice. "Stop! He's trained to protect me!" But his words collided against Mark's training, years of drilled reflexes that demanded control through force. The tension rippled outward, thickening the air. Time slowed as Jake's mind raced through every possible outcome, every nightmare that had haunted his sleep, flashing vividly. Scenes of violence, loss, and helplessness. Max stood firm, unwavering in his duty, but even the dog's steadfastness couldn't erase the razor edge of danger slicing through the moment. Then, like an abrupt thunderclap, plainclothes agents appeared, stepping out from behind hedges and parked cars, their badges gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Hold it right there!" one barked sharply, authoritative and commanding. Mark's body stiffened, the taser reluctantly lowered as the unseen threat was replaced by a new, undeniable authority. Relief and frustration warred in Jake's chest, relief that Max was safe, frustration that it had come to this, that ignorance had pushed the situation to the brink of violence. The agents didn't offer explanation immediately, their presence only adding layers to Jake's swirling storm of emotions. Anger burned deep and fierce, not at the officers or agents, but at the fragile thread of understanding that had nearly snapped. How could someone mistake a guardian for a danger? How could fear so easily overshadow recognition? In Jake's mind, Max was not just a dog, but a symbol of survival, a beacon of hope against a past too heavy to carry alone. To see that nearly extinguished by misunderstanding was a wound sharper than any physical injury. His fists clenched, knuckles whitening. The suburban quiet had been shattered, not by violence, but by a moment of ignorance that echoed larger struggles. The chasm between civilians and veterans, between fear and trust, between assumption and knowledge. Jake's anger wasn't blind rage. It was a furnace forged from years of fighting unseen battles, from the quiet victories and the scars that never faded. Today, that anger ignited, a spark fueled by a profound sense of injustice. The incident crystallized everything Jake had lived through: the constant need to prove his worth beyond his uniform, the relentless battle to reclaim normalcy, the fragile alliance between man and dog that had become his sanctuary. And now, in the middle of a peaceful street lined with white picket fences, that sanctuary had been threatened, almost destroyed, by a single moment of fear and misjudgment. The quiet neighborhood bore witness, but Jake knew this was no ordinary confrontation. It was the opening salvo of a war far more complex than any battlefield he had known, one fought not with weapons, but with awareness, respect, and the will to see beyond surface fear. The aftermath settled over the Reynolds household like a heavy fog, dense and suffocating. The news of the near Tasing incident rippled outward swiftly, carried on the digital winds of social media, and whispered in hushed conversations at the neighborhood coffee shops. For Jake, every headline and comment was a fresh cut, reopening wounds that never truly healed. The weight of his trauma, already an unrelenting shadow, now bore the added sting of betrayal. This wasn't the enemy on a distant battlefield. This was someone in a badge, someone whose sworn duty was to protect and serve, who had almost turned a weapon on the one thing keeping Jake grounded. The community's response fractured with a brittle sharpness. On one side were those who clung to a rigid interpretation of authority, rallying behind Officer Mark Davis with arguments steeped in protocol and the presumed danger of a barking large dog. He was just doing his job, they said. You can't just have dogs running wild, threatening officers. These voices carried the weight of institutional trust, amplified by a fear of disorder and a belief that unquestioning obedience was safety's foundation. On the other side stood an emergent chorus of support, people who saw through the surface tension of the event to the deeper injustice beneath. Neighbors who had witnessed Max's calm behavior, veterans who understood the delicate dynamics of trauma, and advocates who recognized how fragile the bond between service animal and handler truly was, all joined in a growing movement demanding accountability. Jake felt the sting of isolation acutely. The very neighborhood he had hoped to call safe now felt riddled with invisible lines, dividing friend from foe, understanding from ignorance. Yet, beneath the weight of public scrutiny and personal pain, a stubborn ember of resolve began to glow. Jake refused to be crushed by this moment. With deliberate focus, he sought out a veterans advocacy group renowned for championing rights for those with invisible wounds. Their offices were a sanctuary where stories like his were met with understanding rather than judgment, where battles fought in silence were acknowledged and honored. Together, they mapped out a path forward. The first step: demand a formal investigation into police training and protocols regarding service animals. It was a delicate, uphill battle, pushing back against ingrained practices, challenging decades of institutional inertia. But Jake's voice, once muted by trauma, now rang clear and determined. He poured every ounce of pain, every memory of fear and betrayal, into the fight. The veterans group mobilized community support, organized meetings, and harnessed the power of local media to shine a relentless spotlight on the issue. The involvement of the FBI, already present at the scene due to unrelated surveillance, added a layer of gravity and scrutiny that could not be ignored. Investigators questioned officers, examined protocols, and reviewed body camera footage with a meticulousness that sent ripples through the police department. Mark Davis, once confident and reactive, now found himself under disciplinary review. The agency grappled with the consequences of training that failed to distinguish between threat and service, fear and duty. Amid the turmoil, unexpected alliances formed. Other veterans reached out, sharing their own stories of misunderstanding and struggle, building a network of solidarity that buoyed Jake's spirit. Empathetic citizens, moved by the stark injustice, lent their voices and their support, bridging divides and fostering dialogue. In meetings filled with somber determination and occasional bursts of frustration, Jake found purpose, transforming pain into advocacy, isolation into community. Still, the pain remained raw and immediate. Every echo of Max's bark, every recalled glance of fear in Officer Davis's eyes, lingered like a wound beneath Jake's skin. Yet alongside that pain grew something quieter but no less potent. Hope. Hope born not of naivety, but of hard-won understanding, of seeing the possibility for change where once there was only brokenness. Jake's resolve crystallized into action. The fight was no longer just about him or Max. It was about all the veterans, all the service animals, all the handlers who could be endangered by ignorance and fear. It was about reshaping a system to recognize and respect the unseen battles waged by those who wear their scars beneath the surface. With every meeting, every letter sent, every voice raised in unison, Jake reclaimed a piece of the control that trauma had tried to steal. In the fractured quiet of that neighborhood, beneath the bruised sky of public opinion and personal struggle, a new narrative began to form. It was not one of defeat, but of resilience, a testament to the enduring strength born when pain is met not with silence, but with hope and unyielding determination. The investigation, launched under intense public pressure and rigorous scrutiny, peeled back layers of complacency and neglect within the police department. What emerged was a stark portrait of systemic failure. Officers trained to respond swiftly and decisively, but ill-equipped to recognize the subtle signals of service animals like Max, or to understand the complex realities faced by veterans coping with invisible wounds. The report highlighted a culture where snap judgments were not just frequent, but tacitly encouraged, a dangerous environment where fear trumped discernment, and protocol became an excuse to bypass empathy. Mark Davis, once defensive and uncertain, was now confronted with the tangible consequences of his actions. His superiors mandated a comprehensive re-education program that went far beyond the usual disciplinary measures. He was enrolled in intensive training focused on veteran issues, PTSD awareness, and the critical role service dogs play in the lives of those they assist. More than just classroom instruction, Mark was required to engage directly with veterans, attend workshops led by service dog trainers, and participate in community outreach programs designed to humanize and deepen his understanding. In addition to this, he undertook a community service commitment aimed at repairing the fractured trust between law enforcement and the residents they served, particularly those like Jake, whose experiences had been marginalized or misunderstood. The police department itself was forced to confront its failings. New policies were drafted and adopted with urgency. Mandates for all officers to receive specialized training on identifying and interacting with service animals, protocols for de-escalating situations involving veterans, and stringent guidelines ensuring that force could not be applied without thorough assessment of context. These changes were accompanied by internal audits and ongoing oversight to guarantee adherence, signaling a shift from reactive discipline to proactive prevention. The community hearing where Jake spoke was a turning point, a moment dense with tension and hope. Standing before a crowd that included local officials, police representatives, fellow veterans, and curious citizens, Jake's voice was steady, his words measured but powerful. He described Max not just as a dog, but as a lifeline, a guardian against the shadows of his trauma. He recounted the incident in vivid detail, the shock of betrayal and the near tragedy that could have unfolded. But he also spoke of resilience, of the determination to transform pain into purpose. His testimony was a call for understanding, a plea to dismantle fear and ignorance through education and empathy. The FBI agents who had intervened that day, previously silent observers in the background, stepped forward to lend their voices. Their respect for Jake's courage was palpable. They acknowledged the frailty of trust between civilians and law enforcement, and the crucial role that accountability played in healing those divides. Their presence underscored the seriousness of the matter, lending weight to the community's demand for justice and reform. In the weeks and months that followed, the neighborhood shifted. Divisions softened as neighbors found common ground in shared outrage and collective hope. Forums, workshops, and support groups blossomed, fostering dialogue between veterans, police, and civilians. Jake's story, once a point of contention, became a symbol of perseverance and the power of advocacy. It sparked conversations not only locally, but across the region, drawing attention to the broader challenges faced by veterans and their service animals nationwide. Media outlets picked up the story, highlighting the intersection of mental health, law enforcement, and community safety. Jake's voice became a beacon, inspiring other veterans to come forward, to tell their stories, and to demand better protections. Advocacy organizations seized the momentum to push for legislative changes, ensuring that Jake's fight extended beyond his neighborhood into systemic reform. Though the incident had begun in anger and fear, the resolution was a testament to the possibility of transformation. The triumph was not merely procedural, but deeply human, a victory of empathy over ignorance, dialogue over division. Jake's journey from victim to advocate illuminated how crushing injustice, when met with courage and resolve, could kindle a spark of hope powerful enough to inspire meaningful change. In the quiet moments, watching Max lie peacefully by his side, Jake felt the weight of the battle behind him, but also the strength forged in its fires. The scars remained, but so did the conviction that justice was not just a destination but a process, one built on understanding, respect, and the unyielding belief that even in the darkest times change is possible.